Okay, good afternoon. I am Anto Budiajo. Welcome to Monday Live. This is something that we do every Monday afternoon at 3 to figure out the future for smart buildings. Welcome to Monday Live. Just in case you wonder who we are listed on mondaylive.org. Just to point out that views expressed here on this show are personal, not of any company or organization. Just sort of keep that in mind. Please do post questions and comments on the Zoom chat. We really would love to make this as interactive as possible. And if you want any of the links or any of the information that's shared on this deck that I'm showing, that is also on the homepage of mondaylive.org. So over the course of January, our shows are going to have the theme around Smarter Summit, the preparation for the Smarter Summit that's coming up in February. And so for today, we're going to be talking about building owners' changing needs. What are the trends and what are people seeing in terms of how building owners are talking about smart buildings? This is one of the topics that we'll be covering at the summit. This is part of the prep. Obviously, a reminder: Smarter Summit, smartersummit.org is the URL for information and to register. We do hope to see you all there. Over to Ken. What's going on in Kenland?
Lots, actually. Been very busy. We're pulling our sessions together for AHR as well. Of course, you get to go first, but we follow up the next few days. We've got an amazing program. I've just written an article for Connected Contractor, and the title is Meet the Who's Who of the Industry. About halfway through this, I kind of was looking at all the people we've got participating this year, and it really is a great representation of our industry, and I'm extremely pleased with that. Our reinvention's been going well. We've been catching the interest of a lot of new people that we haven't been able to in the past, and the idea of having everybody do a little bit and posting it seems to be working. The timing seems to work out extremely well. The idea that we always had to wait for a month to post anything when we forgot what it was we were going to post. So I think we can now post stuff that's on our desk, and we can get information back and forth quicker. We're very pleased to bring Passive Logic on as one of our sponsors. Last week we brought on Keith as one of our contributing editors, and that was instrumental because we were able to put them both into one of our sessions, which I've got on the screen there. One of our sessions that is part of our Turning Chaos into Creativity program at AHR is Metaverse, Digital Twins, and Augmented Reality. And we've got that. The host is Dave Serino, and Nicholas is not sure whether he's going to be able to make it in person or not, from Sweden. Keith, California, and Troy from Salt Lake City. So got a good spackling there. I think also these folks can speak to this subject. This is actually a subject we actually haven't dealt with much at Monday Live. So I'm kind of interested to see where it goes and what we might learn from it. Again, we're supporting the Smarter Summit, and hoping you all come out to that. I'm seeing something quite interesting. In the past, I've had about over 22,000 followers on LinkedIn, and I always wondered, who the heck are these people? And what's been happening is every time I touch a new sponsor or a new contributing editor, I'm seeing a flare up of folks I don't think I know, but when I go and click on them, they're actually are part of my network already. So I have a lot of folks that are actually just out there watching, lurking the shadows, but it's interesting that they're all tend to be have an allegiance to particular sponsors, particular contributing editors and stuff. Quite often when somebody comes on, we'll see 20, 30 people interacting with liking and commenting and stuff like that. And then somebody else will come on, or another new sponsor, and I'll see another group. So I think that's probably a pretty good description of our industry, is we are fragmented into a bunch of little areas, and the dream of the new reinvented automated buildings is to kind of pull that together. And of course, the other goal we've got is to try and validate this synthetic data movement that is occurring. We know it's happening, that we have the capability of generating. I can be replaced by a robot, where that wasn't too hard to imagine, but then we have to have, how do we validate that information? How do we attach a person to it, or somebody that we can actually say, is that right? Or we don't think that's right. Anyway, interesting times. Back to you, Anto.
Thank you. Interesting points. And yeah, the whole metaverse thing, maybe we'll tackle that as a theme for a month sometime this year. Interesting. Just on the trends, I think it's great to see all of these people gathering for AHR and the Smarter Summit. I've been watching the registration come in for the Smarter Summit. It's early days yet, but what's interesting to me is that a lot of the names that I'm seeing are names that I don't know, and that's always a good thing, bringing new people in. So that's encouraging. And Mark, you have something.
I do. I thought this was interesting. So here is a professor from Israel that has written an article that talking about skyscrapers are huge mistakes. And in particular, and I encourage everybody to take a look at this, is that 3 key points from this is that utilizing glass as an envelope material means that we're building greenhouses, creating unbearable environment for people in those buildings, that a skyscraper consumes much more energy per square meter, and that the taller the building, the more diverse microclimates the different floors are exposed to. And I just this kind of caught me, like, all right, we look at many of the new buildings being built globally, and obviously most of them are skyscrapers for the most part. And other than that one, I think we saw months ago in Saudi Arabia, they're building it vertically, and it's some ungodly long building or whatever the case is. Anyway, but I just thought this was interesting. So I just wanted to call that to folks' attention, that here we are getting hit about skyscrapers now at this particular point in time.
Yeah, Mark, the new Google headquarters in London is actually flat. They're saying it's a skyscraper laying down, but it's just a flat. It's not a tall building at all.
Yeah, and the one in Saudi, if I remember right, I think it was Saudi.
Yeah,
they were talking about that was like, I don't know, some ungodly amount of length.
17 miles.
15 miles? Okay, thank you.
Along the wall.
Yeah.
Jeez.
So can you imagine walking that every day? You could get your steps in easily,
I left something in the office. I'll be back.
Yeah.
for lunch.
Oh,
They're actually planning a high-speed electric train down the middle of this thing.
Yeah.
To help you. So
yeah, basically a subway. So I did enough of that in New York City. Thank you. No, thank you. But anyway.
This is interesting, Mark. Although it did occur to me that the attributes of buildings, the glass and everything else, doesn't just apply to high rise. It actually applies to a 5-story building. It's the same issue.
Sure.
So I kind of wondered about that. Yeah, great. Any other thoughts, news, or anything anybody wants to share before we move on to the topic of the day? Hearing none, we shall move on. And preparation for the Smarter Summit. The way we're sort of looking at this is we're at base camp heading for the summit, and we're going to be in base camp for another 3-4 weeks, and we're preparing for it, right? So we know the summit is coming up, and that's kind of just the framework that we're thinking about it what we're doing this week. And this week we're going to be talking about building owners changing needs. So I'm going to stop my share, and I'm going to prompt Rick and Anno, who is going to lead this conversation today. Rick, will you go first and sort of set the scene and do it that way?
Sure. In preparation for the summit, we we're thinking about how to best communicate what the State of the Union is, and talking about what has changed from the vendor side, from the technology side. We discussed last week, and there's like 30 bullet points of like evidence of things that are changing on the that have changed or are changing in the technology side. And then on the other side of that equation is the owner side, and today we're going to talk a little bit about what some of that evidence is of the market, or the owners, or the community actually giving good feedback to and changing the way that they're asking, and the what they're asking for relative to technology for their buildings. So at the summit, there will be these two different sections, one on the sort of the supply of new smarter building technology, and the other side is the demand side of for smarter building technology. And as we were kind of debating and kicking around, you can't have one without the other, or it's really good to have both. Advancements on both sides of that equation. Otherwise, one side is unbalanced. So that's fundamentally what we're talking about today. Is what is the evidence of how owners are expecting something different? How are they asking for it? And then how do we respond? But so at the summit, we will have a variety of people that'll be on stage or in front to talk about what evidence they're seeing. And it'll and so far, I think James Dice is going to be one of the people who's going to talk about the evidence and the people that have been on his radar and on his shows, talking about from the owner perspective what's different. Andrew Rogers has also volunteered to be up there to talk about what he's seeing in terms of the demand from the owner side. And then Anno, I'm going to throw it to in just a second, is going to talk about in his a little bit of change of role in the last few months, but also just overall from what his focus and the different roles he's had over the last year or so, what he's been seeing that's been changing from the demand side of the equation. So that's the setup.
You're on mute, dude.
I know, I want to chime in.
Yeah, I think Rick framed it well. I like the perspective of supply and demand in this particular equation. And I think as we go through that discussion, what we want to highlight is probably the disconnects between the supply and demand. What's missing from, and I see it from both ends, right? I see it from the supply side folks who are proffering solutions that I think are disconnected from the demand side, building owners side, are going like, and the reverse model as well, where I think there's interesting demands that are not being picked up bigger. So I like the supply demand side equation, Rick. I think that way always highlights where's the imbalances.
Then it also draws out the classic market, the need for a market, for the coming together, for a common language, common expectations, common definitions, to be able to move a market forward. And a lot of us are old enough to remember that when technology is evolving rapidly, there's a lack of understanding of what the technology can do, how it works, how does it work together, and a lot of what I think we're seeing from the owner side right now is evidence of lessons that they learned as organizations from the evolution of IT or the evolution of servers, local area networks, internet, and now the expectation of now how do the lessons that we learned about implementing technology, and then how does the technology itself affect our operations or what we're trying to do, whether we're trying to run a school or run a shopping center or whatever. How does the technology affect what we can do? So there's two parts of that. What can the technology do? And then how do I go about understanding the technology so I can buy it so that it can go have that impact that I'm hoping it'll have? And it's interesting to see, so that's on the demand side. It's interesting to see that they are, that what we're seeing a lot of evidence of is that they are, asking for, they're going straight to wanting interoperability rather than say, I'm okay with proprietary solutions. I think they learned those lessons from the IT days that, yeah, it's great to have if I can only get a siloed solution or a vertical solution, fine, I'll take that. But I'd really like to be able to have interoperability kind of the way that I have with my interchangeable components on my my network, or how different components can be just plug and play onto the internet. And so they're skipping the some of the maybe the learning curve of technology, and they're jumping straight to the I want interoperability. I think that's one of the things.
How are they asking? What words do they use? Do they actually use the word interoperability, or do they talk about open and other things? I'm always curious in terms of words being used.
I think that, in fact, that's a really good question, Anto, and to Rick's earlier point of my sort of change in role. I don't, in the current role, what I'm doing right now with the organization, I don't hear the words interoperable in that context at all. They don't really use the term interoperable. They will say things like, I wanted to work together and I wanted to collaborate and I want to make sure that I can use, the big focus I get all the time is, how do I leverage the data from one thing for something else, right? And then there's a whole spectrum of stuff that we can get into that. But they don't actually use the words interoperable. In fact, in some odd context, I think they're actually purposely avoiding the word, weirdly enough. It's not that they're not using the word. I think they're actually avoiding the word per se. In that, I think that we've been pounding the interoperable table so bloody long that, to Rick's earlier point, it's like, well, I don't really know what that means, and I don't really know what that gets. And people have promised me all sorts of things on the interoperable for such a long time that I forget it. Stop using the word. I'm changing to what are my outcomes, and they're using more the outcomes terminology. What are the outcomes I'm trying to get? More so than the answer is interoperability. That's more what I hear.
Pete just chimed in on chat and about the people wanting choice. Is choice or some?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wanted to agree with Anto as well, is that they're not using the word interoperability, but they're using all these phrases around it. And but I don't know, you nailed it. One of the things is they want to be able to take their data to somewhere else, to some other thing, to some other app, to some other thing, even if they can't articulate exactly what they want to be able to take their data to go do. They know that that's something that, and that's a really common one. I want to be able to use my data. They also don't probably say API, but they describe the fact that they want to be able to use their data for other applications.
Yeah, that's an interesting one too. I see that too, and I've just, for argument's sakes, in the last week, I've been involved in multiple discussions where we were working with partners and we're talking about data, and it's fun to see. And I'm hoping none of these are on the call, but it's fun to see some of my sales marketing guys, spout the word API, and I go, "Do you really know what you mean by that?" He goes, "No, but it sounds like a really cool thing." So they know enough to be dangerous in the area, but they know enough to know that that's kind of how things get done. What it means and how it works, they don't really know or care about per se.
So guys, a couple other words I'd like to throw out, to see if they are sticking at all. One is mobility and the other is accessibility. So is the data mobile? And gets the way of describing, can I move, can I move my data from one place to another, like you were saying, Rick? And then it occurred to me, what about, is my data accessible? Do either one of those words come up? Do we think they might be useful as opposed to
Yeah.
choice?
Accessibility, but they don't actually use the word accessibility, oddly, but it's the right word to use. But yes, they more talk about it, that the data, back to Rick's earlier statement, they want to be able to use the data for anything and everything and things they haven't even thought about, which to them implies accessibility.
Mhm.
But they don't really say those terms. They just say, I should be able to get to use the data for other things. How and that works, you engineering folks go work that out, type of deal. So it's implied in what they say, but they don't actually use the word accessible.
So the usability, is that the word? Usability.
Usability.
Is my data usable? Do I have usability of data?
I see that's a bigger term, I think.
Yeah.
Usability.
So I'm
Rick,
curious.
go ahead, Lisa. Sorry.
Well, I love the focus on the words, but I also hear, and we're hearing more of this, is the fear that someone else can get their data.
Yeah.
And that the term interoperability can have a double-edged sword in the owner market, because sometimes there's not a real clear understanding of what that implies. So I'm curious, Anna, especially from your current perspective, what do you hear in the cyber physical security realm?
Yeah. Cyber, I get an email twice a day on cyber stuff, just internally. Are we meeting all the gateways? What are the cyber requirements? Have we checked this off? Are the partners, what's their cyber hypersensitivity on cyber, both at our end, from what we do, but also the clients and the customers that we talk to, as everyone's very versed these days on cyber requirements. It's a gate. It's basically a gate you have to go through. Everyone that I talk to have got skilled senior folk now who understand cyber from a building data perspective, not an IT perspective. It's been intriguing to me to see mature discussions about the cyber in that specific area, about understanding that, well, if you're putting gateways in or APIs, what is all the site? And they talk about it from all the aspects we expect it, what is PII information versus, sensitivity versus access versus, hacking versus ransomware versus it's a full suite and spectrum of stuff that
Carol has a good question.
Yeah, sorry.
Carol's asking about ownership of data. Does that ever come up?
All the time, right? And again, I'm finding that the clients, customers, and the internals are, again, fully aware of data ownership about, stuff. I think the fun part is they're a little ignorant on how data can be co-owned almost, or replicated, that there is derivations of the data that could be, there's still a lot of fuzziness about that. There's the raw data, there's processed data, and then there's value-added data, and then who owns what bits.
Anonymized is the magic word.
Anonymized data. And who owns that in that chain of stuff, right? And so when the data ownership comes up, well, okay, the temperature sensor value, yeah, that's mine. That's the building. That's mine. Okay, well, if I take that and co-join that with a few other things and produce another piece of data, do you own that or do I own that because I created that? Oh, that's a bit fuzzy. That starts to get a little bit more fuzzy.
Yeah, the data that results from collecting data, right?
Right.
The results of analysis, for instance, or reports that are created or things like that.
Right.
Yeah.
So who owns that piece, right? If you put the work and the effort to run the algorithms that creates the superset or the data of the data, who owns that piece, type of thing. That's becoming more fuzzy than the original source data. So
So
that's
Hanno, quick question is, you keep referring to they. Is that, are they the, the occupiers, the REITs, or the owners? And who are they actually using to actually deploy or action all this? Is it MSIs? And it's just a...
Yeah, I mean, it's still, and again, I'll only talk from, where I'm at the moment and what we're doing at the moment. So they are typically on the other end of the spectrum are the clients, right? The big customers, the big building owners. So we deal with, I don't know what the number is, some stupid number of billion square feet of property. And they range from, large corporate property owners all the way down to the small, or commercial, just to be clear. And the, when they talk, sorry, what was the second part again?
Yeah, just who are they using to deploy, get hold of and deploy the whole thing? Are they got some sort of middle person, an MSI or someone to actually help them?
Typically, we have a whole deployment group that is, and they range from a full stack MSI company that you all would know. That do full stack MSI work, very well versed in it, Tritium, Niagara, your typical deployment ones, all the way down to some, simple SI type contract deployment models.
Okay.
And partners themselves, by the way, that's the other thing that, by the way, I did learn too. So we will also use partners deployment resources. So if we're using a partner, let's simple example, occupancy data. I want to do occupancy. We partner with a particular occupancy company. Then they're on the hook to the deployment of the occupancy sensors, for example.
Okay.
So Rick, I'm curious. When you talk to owners and maybe consultants that help them and school districts or whatever, and they know enough to draw a diagram, an architecture diagram, what does it look like?
Looks like the smarter stack.
Yes, every time. I was going to say the same answer every time.
There's one right over there on the table from a recent large enterprise that is asked for help in doing a large procurement, and on their own they came up with the horizontal architecture or the smarter stack, and called out. So they do call out some specific things that they've heard they should ask for, right? And I think they've learned some lessons again back from some of the IT stuff. So they want cybersecurity. They know they need an ontology, so they might be saying specifically, brick or haystack. They know that they need something called a single pane of glass. I mean, but the architecture diagram looks like the smarter stack, and that's fantastic to see. Now, whether that came from a consultant that gave it to them or whether they came up with it on their own, I do think, back to I've got this little bit of hypothesis, I guess, going, that a lot of the things they learned about how to do things in the IT world are now transitioning into our particular OT, actually into several different OTs. But the lessons of how technology can be deployed, how it's going to work, what we should expect of it, that we're just talking about data and who owns the data. Well, I think that that applies not just to our domain, but it applies to all the different things that an owner or an enterprise is doing. Is the data about all the different things is in question. So it's not just about the data about their buildings. The data about what they're actually doing is helping to shape what their opinion of data for buildings is. And what they're learning to use AI is another one. And I was kind of just jotting down a few examples of, they'll ask for, what's your position, or what do you, how can AI help me? What's the state of the art for AI for buildings? And I don't think that question is just coming out of thin air. I think it's coming from they're they're being pitched the use of AI for other parts of what they do, whether they're a school or a hospital or a shopping mall. So they're learning about smart technologies and smart cars. They've got smart cars and smart watches that are collecting data and using data and then trying to sell them ads.
So
So
you may have
people are-
no idea what they're using it for.
But inside of everybody's organization now, they're asking themselves, what should I be thinking about relative to data and AI and better communications tools, better process management tools. And so it's not like we're living in this vacuum of building technology where all of a sudden technology is relevant. Everything about how you teach or learn or work or play is being impacted by technology. And so then they turn to us and say, what do you got for us? What are the words that I should be using?
And just to extend on Rick, and I see the same thing, but even further than that, they will now actually challenge me if I say the word AI, machine learning in some application. They'll go, okay, stop right there. You got to, let me, is this the bullshit tag that you've put on the thing, or is it real? And if it's real, I'm going to do a deep dive. They've seen enough of what I call AI ML stickering. And I agree with Rick, it's coming from parallel parts of their business. It's not coming from us. It's from other things that they're doing in their business that AI ML has preceded us. And they got burnt with the early days of, well, it's really just an Excel spreadsheet and a few guys in India, running it. So no, they're asking serious questions about, show me your models, show me how it works, show me the technology, what platforms are you building it on? And they're versed in the words, that surprises me.
So that's OI, right? Offshore intelligence.
No, there's a name for that. It's called, what it's called? It's artificial intelligence. It's AAI.
Hey, can I ask another question that might take us a little bit different direction, but what's the awareness and temperature and tolerance surrounding vendor lock-in? And what's their knowledge and ability to detect that and prevent that and ask for something other than that?
You can start, Rick.
Well, there's a heightened awareness of it. And at all different levels, they're looking for it. But I believe that there is, I just heard this last week, there's a willingness to have a trade-off. We'll take some vendor lock-in if it can be clearly articulated of what additional benefit and what risk that brings. So it's kind of like the advanced level discussion of proprietary it's fine to go straight there because I'm hearing that they're willing to take some amount of proprietary, some amount of potential lock-in, some amount of you have to go to this particular repair shop to get your vehicle fixed. And again, we do that in our industry too. It's like, well, if you want to change to that code, you're going to have to come to me, or you're going to have to take this class. You're going to have to learn this proprietary language. They're willing to have some of that trade if there's a trade, if the benefit outweighs the risk.
And the benefit is pricing, could be pricing or single throat to choke or something like that. Right?
Confidence, single throat to choke, pricing, price. The only time people go to price is when they don't know what other criteria to use, right? And that's just a lesson from my grandfather taught me about marketing was, the only time people are obsessed with price is when they don't know what the other criteria are. So I didn't mean to change the topic there, but if I can do a trade-off of confidence versus lock-in, I'll take, I'll weigh those. That's what we're hearing.
So I'm curious with this great question, Tracy, and what the team thinks, but I know in the time that I've spent as the building owner, one of the drivers for that is who can I trust to service and show up? And because we have such a shortfall, we think we have a labor shortage in our industry. The building owners are feeling it acutely. Mm-hmm. And today, shortages in their arena is substantial because in many ways they're competing with systems integrators and branches for people that know what to do. So one of the ways they're extending, and outsourcing that is holding somebody accountable for the labor. So it may not necessarily be pricing of components and technology. It may be a way to keep their building service.
And just to extend that, Melissa, and this kind of circles back to a question that Carol posted earlier too. One of the big impacts that we see in our space, of course, is the whole, return to office index, as they call the RTO. Now, what is the RTO? What is your building's RTO? And there's a big impact on what is your current occupancy, how many resources, of the lack of resources do I have, where do I best deploy those resources, whether it's cleaning or fixing or whatever the task is. And to be honest, that's the biggest challenge I see from a building owner's manager's perspective today. I mean, if you were to take away one thing from this discussion, is they just can't wrap their head around the change in the return to office index. Everyone expected to be this, and the graph isn't that, and it's different for different people, and there's been mandates, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the biggest thing that they're all looking to do now is how do I optimize my resources, right? Whether it's my facility guys, my cleaners, my whatever, so that they're doing the best for what I've got, for the occupancy that I've got today, which might change dramatically tomorrow because I'm making a bet, right? And I'm putting bets on the technology that I'm going to deploy, that the RTO is going to stay at a constant or go down or go up, depending upon which way they're betting on the thing. That's the thing that is, if you were to look for opportunities of technology and difference between supply and demand, I'm not sure that a lot of technology suppliers have quite gotten that into their head. How do they adapt the technology that they're doing to suit that fundamental problem?
Yeah, I really agree with you, Anno, and space utilization in general is a huge topic in the building owner market for sure. And I know this group has talked quite a bit about, how do you leverage occupancy data to contribute to that, whether it's, from other work order planning systems and other things. But as the economy continues to do various different, trending oscillations that it always does, them finding ways to resolve those shortages is a very big issue.
So, and there's an interesting twist to this, guys, because it's like a tax, right? Anytime you introduce a new tax, the tax never goes away. When they work out how to optimize for the resources for a lower occupancy, and they do that well with technologies and AIs and whatever, and sensors and whatever, and if we ever get back to 100%, that's not going to change. They're going to go, hey, we've already optimized for lower occupancy. We'll just keep it at that same level because I've just suddenly saved millions of dollars, right?
Maybe they should be kind of learning from the hotel people who've been doing it for years, right? The occupancy is up and down. They leave half of it empty. They know the days, and I guess it's somehow you're going to have to work with the owners so that the staff are at least saying, yeah, I'm going to be in on Tuesday or Wednesday. So at least you've got an idea of what
some
it is.
prediction.
I mean, they're not going to be in on Friday and Monday anyway. So, but yeah, no, I think it's, somehow you've got to get something like that working because there's no easy way of doing it otherwise. But as I say, hotels have been kind of working with those sort of problems for years.
So
Somebody needs to take a hotel application, adapt it for office use, right? For people to use for desk space or whatever.
Well, in venues in general, like the convention center that we're getting ready to go to. I remember when I was still in the convention center building owner role, they were engaging to get all kinds of models because in venues, you have one of the most difficult and challenging demand planning that you can have. You have nobody in the place on one day, and the next day you've got 60,000 people. You know, it's a very interesting conundrum when you start looking at, you know, how you apply capacity management. So it'd be interesting to see what we can learn, you know, from venues to apply to other types of building
Yeah.
scenarios.
Makes
It's a
a lot
great
of sense.
point, Roger.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I know from my kids, you know, they go, oh, yeah, well, I'm going to be in the office on Tuesday and Wednesday. So they already kind of know a week before when they're going to be in. So there's no harm in them kind of just registering it or something. So that at least there's some idea if the building owners can encourage them to do some sort of booking, you know, just to say they're going to be in. Gives you an idea because, you know, again, a lot of people with, especially hotels, and so can even engage in with the lifts. You know, they don't why bother sending all the lifts up to the 22nd floor when you're only going to be have enough people in to occupy 8 floors or something, and shut one of the lifts down. I don't know, but there's stuff you can do, but you've got to have some sort of forecasting method to work with it.
So I'd like to change the conversation a little bit into sort of the procurement side of things in terms of what owners are saying about being open to sort of new procurement instruments or vehicles, especially the whole dimension of the CapEx construction versus the operation of the life. Are you seeing conversations change in that regard in terms of their openness of desire of doing different things?
They are definitely open to desires for doing different things. Any idea what those different things are? No one's got a clue. That's the challenge, right? And so they are. I all the time I hear discussions going on about how best can we get these solutions in, and how are they going to get paid for? Whether they get paid for in shared savings or you know, decreased in resources or better CapEx or planning or that sort of stuff. I do find that the clients we talk to are a lot more open to constructive ways of financing the things. You know, back to Jim's point, they still don't have money. You know, at the end of the day, they have no money. So, you know, how do you finance these things? I find the openness to the discussion is absolutely there. I don't know that real answers are being generated, though. That's the challenge.
At our big corporate clients, we still absolutely see the low bid race to the bottom almost everywhere we look. They don't have the money. So what overlays that is typically a huge procurement process with RFIs and RFPs that often lead nowhere. In fact, they stretch on for 5 years. The people that started them retire out before they're done. It's just completely ridiculous stuff.
Pilot to death, yeah. You get piloted to death, you know.
And that's the rule rather than the exception. And I think that when we look at professional services or the other offerings that we have in this changing landscape, that's one of the biggest dangers, is that when you apply these antiquated processes to new technology, it frequently leads to death and no value, right?
Well, but there, in times of, in trying times or in times of change, and this is again macro look at it. You know, it's not the same old anymore. So it used to be that we knew how many floors have open of a hotel and how many rooms we had to have and how many. We used to just know that because we've been doing it that way for years. But when there's uncertainty, people, you know, to get competitive advantage or to get back on their feet or whatever, they, you know, historically they'll turn to creativity. They'll look for knowledge. They'll bring in, you know, interesting new ideas because it isn't the same old. So it's reason for optimism, but it's also an opportunity. To Anto's point about the procurement, is that we have to, you know, we as the supply side, we have to give them examples of how to get something different. So these decisions that were always same old, we've done it this way for 60 years. When there's difficult times and when there's massive change, people will reevaluate the make versus buy decisions. They'll make the reevaluate the rent versus own. They'll reevaluate the different same old. And that's where, if we as the supply side show them examples of, you know what, you don't have to buy it that way. You can rent it. You don't have to make versus buy decisions. You don't have to make those decisions the way you did for 50 years. There's a new way to do it. So this is where, people turn to technology, they turn to creativity, they turn to innovation during times of disruption. And, so as hard as it, or annoying as it is to have to go through some of the disruption we've seen in terms of the occupancy rates and competitiveness and whatever else, all of our facilities are in a position of turmoil right now. And so we need to take that opportunity to help people rethink how they have done the same old.
Well, I think the bright side is that that although many people have piloted things to death, they died, and that in fact they retired out. And what we have is a new crop of people who might be willing to accept new ideas because, frankly, they're new people, and may not be poisoned with the same do nothingness of previous generations in these areas. So there's hope there.
I think the additional element to that, though, Jim, is, you guys have heard this from me forever, is that the IoT guys have been successful at nibbling away around the edges of the core stuff of what we do, and they've actually come up with some creative, solutions and pricing models and stuff that aren't core to stuff that we do, but they've taken a fair chunk, and they've kind of set some interesting approaches to how they price their stuff, and how they what the value process is, and what the value add that they bring, and how they share that with the building owners. And I've seen that even within our group. There's a lot of appetite for, okay, if I can't get the core BAS thing to do it, how can I do that more creatively outside of the space, and come up with link that up with a financial model that makes sense, for that equation. And we don't, part of our challenge a little bit on this panel is we don't see a lot of that peripheral eating away at the edges piece.
Well, there's some core, believe it or not, some of the large competitors, sometimes known as the Big Four, are getting creative relative to how they're doing procurements as well. It's going to help. Similar to like the big database companies used to have to buy, and you put the database on your own servers, and then it went to seat licenses, right? Oracle had to switch from their business model, how that worked. We're going to see that in our space as well, and we've got large customers saying, "Hey, do you have a rent to own, or do you have a seat license approach instead of having to pay for that building automation system in capital? Can I just pay for it over time?" And that, again, that's evidence of these creative, and Anna, you just said it. You get the same thing, you just pay for it differently. Pay me now, pay me later. I mean, these kind of simple statements are what's starting to be asked for. It's like, I don't want to do it on a capital budget. I want to pay for it over time. So we've got the opportunity, and there are these owners that are asking for all this stuff in these formal RFIs and RFPs, and of course they don't want to share those with the world. They want to keep that competitive advantage to themselves. But as vendors, as we see creative, as we see these, we need to figure out how to capture it and say, hey, here's this other way of procuring, or here's this other approach to technology. Again, you can't blame owners for, in some ways, not using the specific words you want them to use, or not wanting to share their very creative RFI process. They want to, if I'm a bank, I want to have that competitive advantage of some new way of using technology. I want to have that as competitive advantage for myself.
But public sector kind of owners don't have that problem, right?
Right. So that's where in helping some of these school districts and cities in some of these cities and school districts are flush with cash right now because they've got the Inflation Reduction Act money, and they're doing some creative things around smart cities, smart campuses, and that RFI and those documents that they're using to procure, again, whether it's rent or own, or pay me now, pay me later, whatever it is, they're looking for these new technologies and they're looking for interoperability, even if they don't say it. And those documents that they're using to request it, those are by nature public documents. Those are not secret. A city might want to have competitive advantage, but the reality is the documents they use to procure that are open to be replicated. So one of the things we did back in the day of when IT was exploding is that we found good examples of procurements, and we posted them. We said, hey, here's the documents you use to get this different kind of outcome. And we've done the Division 2525 work. We've done specifications around analytics. We've done these different things, and I think those documents and those frameworks are going to be adopted because people want the outcomes that are different.
Rick,
yeah,
is
which
this
back to that
around-
keyword.
Yeah. So Rick, is this
Sorry.
around retrofit and refurb rather than new construction?
Both.
Really?
Both. Yeah. So wanting different kinds of outcomes, and we're at a point now where we can truly say you can have cybersecurity, you can have interoperability, you can have interchangeable parts at the different layers of a stack. And so whether it's new construction or major retrofits, they want the different kinds of outcomes. They want to have already built the last dumb building, and they want the next ones to be, more enhanced with technology.
Sure, but the payment kind of stretching out over periods I haven't seen that in new construction. I've seen it in sort of in retrofit and refurbishment, but the construction model doesn't really still work.
Sure, but it does in the build to suit. I mean, that's back to the whole, I don't want to own my building. I just want to rent it, but I want you to build it to my very specific needs and with these capabilities. So again, rethinking some of the way that the money used to just be budgeted and planned. I think Melissa was going to jump in too.
Yeah, I was just going to say to what you're saying, Ray. I mean, I've seen chiller plants and other things done that way. There's lots of good examples where new constructions happen that way, but I'm curious to the team. Is there an opportunity for us as an industry to create some kind of KPI benchmarks that, if you make certain investments, it can help in other ways that are more aggregate? I'll give you an example. IFMA produces a benchmark report that I used to use a lot that would show different investments and some of the impacts that it might have, as a building owner. And one of the interesting metrics was the investment in staffing. If you are adequately staffed and what that impact was going to be on various different aspects of your capital and operating cost. But I'm curious if anybody thinks that might be an interesting thing that we as an industry could do to show what the technology side of that could do from an OPEX and CAPEX point of view.
Of course, I'm going to say yes, and I'm going to say that there's a lot of evidence, and I've had so many opportunities to have those conversations with owners where when you suggest that, well, we can actually give you a template for calculating that, they're dying to have that.
Yeah, and Tracy's got a great point. In a residential arena, that might be easier to do, but it seems like you could pick out some building characteristics and show some, for certain types, for K through 12 school districts, this is, some things you could experience, some outcomes that seem to be standard variables and things like that. It could be useful.
Okay. Closing comments, Rick, Anto, Anno, and even
Isn't
$5
there a
bucks.
commercial where this happened?
Closing thoughts, Rick first, and then Anno. Thank you.
So as the Melissa was perfect setup, because one of the things I think that is the coalition we're going to do, folks, next year is creating that sort of template for that total cost of ownership calculator, and where does technology impact total cost of ownership. So a little preview of some of the focus for next year.
Yeah, and I think my closing comments back to my earlier point, the whole return to office thing is a real thing, and that, you know, they're looking, and it's actually one more, just to go back to Jim and Rick's point about, you know, this is a real thing that is changing people's looks of how do I finance stuff as a result. It's one more, it's a real thing that's impacting building owners. They are struggling with it. And I don't, coming back to the supply and demand, I don't see, you know, in our space, people stepping up to that. You know, there's a real demand, and I don't see the supply stepping in yet to come up with real answers. You know, half the problem is it's a very complex problem, right? So, you know, what are the right answers? I don't want to make it too small, but it's one that we struggle with all the time. And what is that return to office index looking like? Is it going to flatten out? Is it going to step up? When is it going to happen? What bets are you going to make for that? How are you going to help the building owner, et cetera, et cetera?
Right. So just to wrap up, Ken, can I pick on you? Because you've been in this industry for several decades. You've been hearing this. Is this different from what you would have heard 30 years ago? I mean, is there substantial difference? Are you seeing a trend?
I wouldn't think substantial. One thing I wanted to add, but the conversation was going pretty hectic and I didn't want to change the direction, but there is another sort of some pieces in our industry. One is just geographics. Although we're able to do most things remote, the feet on the ground is still significant to have somebody actually come out and install this stuff and to make it work when it's broken. So I think that often gets into the owner decision much more than you think, because in certain areas of the country, particular products are not well represented and serviced. The other complication that's sort of happening is the supply and demand is now starting to enter into that as well. So that's sort of two other owner decisions that have to kind of be dealt with. And I think they've been there forever. Some of the newer ones, the cybersecurities, the new purchasing, you know, buying your system on time or buying it, BAS as a service, I think is a new concept and is of interest to the owners to try and get their head around that. So yeah, a bit of sameness, but a bit of change as well. I think we have to innovate and come up with the right solution. The discussion on data is obviously a big piece. I think there wasn't so much of that in the past. I mean, the data was kept within the systems in the past, but now with the independent data layer, it's escaping and it's becoming more commonplace. I'm not sure if it's
That's good. That's good. Yeah, appreciate that. All right, let's wrap this today's show. Thank you very much, Rick and Anno. And we'll get the video out tomorrow, and we'll be back next week to continue our preparation for the summit. So with that, have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.